On Christmas Eve, my daughter stopped me at the table, covered my plate, and said I hadn't earned the right to eat. Everyone kept chewing. No one spoke. I didn't argue or cry. I picked up my coat and walked out. By morning, one quiet decision triggered a chain reaction she never saw coming, and nothing in her life stayed the same. Before I tell you everything, do me a small favor. If stories about family, dignity, and hard-earned turning points resonate with you, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from so these stories can reach others who need them. My name is Elena Rojas. I'm 67 years old, and for the past 3 years I've lived in my daughter Marina's house since my husband Hector passed away. I believed that Christmas Eve of 2024 would finally bring peace to a home that felt tense and transactional since the day I arrived. I was wrong. Marina has always been difficult. Even as a child, she demanded without gratitude and measured love by what it provided her. I paid for her education. I helped with the down payment on the very house where I now slept like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. When her husband Lucas lost his job, I quietly filled the gap. I told myself that family means helping without keeping score. That December, I tried harder than usual. I spent more than $500 on gifts for my grandchildren, Nina, 8, and Leo, 5. Choosing toys I knew they'd love, clothes in their favorite colors, and sweets they weren't allowed to have most days. For Marina, I bought a pearl necklace. It wasn't cheap, but I convinced myself it might soften whatever had grown sharp inside her. All day, I worked in the kitchen, peeling potatoes, washing dishes, setting the table with decorations I'd saved from my old home. For a few hours, I felt useful again. I watched Marina prepare the turkey, Lucas open the wine, and the children raced through the hallways shouting about Santa. I let myself believe we were, finally, a family again. When we sat down, the room glowed with soft lights. Lucas raised his glass and toasted family, and my chest warmed the way it hadn't since Hector's funeral. Then the plates began to fill. Marina carved the turkey. Lucas passed the bowls. When I stood with my plate, smiling, ready to serve myself, Marina stopped me cold. "Mom, you didn't contribute anything to this dinner," she said, her voice slicing through the room. "So you don't eat." The silence that followed was brutal. My grandchildren stared at me, confused. Lucas didn't even look up. He kept chewing, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, my plate trembling, waiting for anyone, to say this was wrong. No one did. I helped all day. I whispered, "I was in the kitchen with you." "Helping isn't paying," Marina replied, flat and final. "We bought everything. You didn't put in money." Nina asked, "Why isn't Grandma eating?" Marina didn't hesitate. "Because Grandma needs to learn responsibility." That word, responsibility, cut deeper than hunger ever could. I had worked 40 years as a seamstress. I'd woken before dawn for decades to keep food on our table. I'd sold my car so Marina could finish school. Now I was being lectured about responsibility in front of my grandchildren. Little Leo climbed down from his chair and offered me a piece of bread. "Grandma, you can have mine." Before I could speak, Marina snapped, "Go sit down. Grandma's fine." I left my plate on the table and walked to my room. The clink of silverware followed me up the stairs. In that small room, decorated with Christmas lights I'd hung for the children, I sat on the bed and felt something shift. I replayed the past 3 years with new eyes. The comment about bills, the mornings with nothing left for breakfast, the dinners already cleared when I returned from walks. I remembered Marina insisting I move in, promising I'd never be alone. I finally understood why my presence had always felt temporary. The next morning, while everyone left for their annual outing downtown, I did something I'd never done before. I went into Marina's room. Her phone lay charging on the nightstand. She'd never changed her passcode, Nina's birthday. My hands shook as the screen unlocked. I found a group chat. Messages that made my stomach drop. Complaints about me being in the way. Calculations about my pension. Plans, detailed coal plans, to move me into a cheap facility once they'd saved enough. Jokes about selling my furniture. A message from Marina describing a dream where I was gone, and she felt relieved. I took photos of everything. By the time they returned that evening, I had packed one suitcase. Clothes, medications, documents, and photographs of Hector. I wrote a letter, measured, calm, explaining that I was leaving to live somewhere I would be respected. I left it on my pillow. When the taxi arrived, I didn't look back. That night, in my friend Rose's apartment across town, I slept without fear or shame for the first time in months. And as I stared at the ceiling in the quiet, I knew the balance had shifted. The people who had treated me as a resource had just lost access, and the ripple from that loss was only beginning. I woke up the next morning in Rose's guest room to a quiet I had almost forgotten existed. No footsteps above my head, no television murmuring from another room, no sharp comments disguised as jokes. Just a distant hum of traffic and the smell of coffee drifting down the hallway. For a moment, guilt tried to creep in, an old habit, but it didn't stay long. The humiliation of Christmas Eve still burned too clearly. Rosa knocked gently before entering, holding 2 mugs. "You slept through the night," she said softly, as if that fact alone meant something important. "That hasn't happened in a while, has it?" I shook my head. "Not in years." We sat at the small kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the worn wood. Rosa didn't push for details. She didn't need to. She had seen enough of life to recognize when someone had finally reached their limit. By mid-morning, my phone began to vibrate. Marina's name flashed on the screen again and again. I watched it light up, go dark, then light up once more. Rosa raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I let the calls go unanswered. For 3 years, I had answered every summons, every demand. This time, silence was my answer. Around noon, a message arrived. "Mom, where are you? We found your letter. The kids are scared. Please call me." I read it once, then set the phone face down. That afternoon, I went to the bank. For years, my finances had been shared in the name of convenience. Marina had been added to my checking account so she could help manage expenses. Help had slowly turned into expectation, then entitlement. I sat across from the advisor and spoke calmly, as if I were discussing groceries instead of severing the last thread of control my daughter had over me. Remove the joint access. Cancel the automatic transfers. Redirect my pension to a new account in my name only. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized I'd given away. When I left the bank, my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. Marina's voice was syrupy, frantic. "Mom, thank God, we've been so worried. Why would you leave without telling us?" "I did tell you," I replied evenly. "I left a letter. But that was so sudden. We could have talked. Like we talked on Christmas Eve?" I asked. There was a pause, just long enough to be telling. "I was stressed," she said quickly. "You know how the holidays are." "I know," I said. "I also know I no longer owe you access to my money." The line went dead silent. "What do you mean?" she finally asked. "I mean I've made changes. You won't be receiving transfers anymore." Her breath caught. "Mom, we count on that money." "That's exactly the problem," I replied and hung up. The calls escalated after that. Messages layered with guilt, fear, promises. Rosa watched it all unfold with quiet concern. "They're not worried about you," she said gently. "They're worried about what they've lost." 2 days later, Marina showed up. Rosa answered the door while I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. Marina's voice trembled, too loud, too rehearsed. She brought the children with her, an intentional move. I stepped onto the balcony where I could see them, but remain out of reach. "Mom, please," Marina called up. "Just talk to me." I leaned on the railing. There's nothing left to say. Nina looked up at me, eyes wide. "Grandma, are you mad at us?" "No," I said quickly, my voice softening. "Never at you." Marina tried again. Apologies this time. Promises of change. Tears that might have meant something weeks ago. Then I mentioned the messages, the plans, the place they'd chosen for me. Her face drained the color. "You went through my phone?" she hissed. "You planned my disappearance." I replied calmly. The children shifted uncomfortably. Rosa stepped forward and asked Marina to leave. Marina's last words, spat like poison, followed her down the steps. "You're selfish. After everything we did for you." I didn't answer. That night, Lucas came. He didn't knock politely. He pounded, shouted my name from the street, accused me of ruining their lives, of abandoning my responsibilities. I stood firm, my voice steady, refusing to engage on his terms. When Rosa mentioned police, he backed off, angry, defeated, exposed. The days that followed were quiet again. Weeks passed, then months. I settled into a rhythm with Rosa, shared meals, long walks, afternoons at the community center. For the first time since Hector died, I felt useful without being exploited. News trickled in through old neighbors. The house was listed, furniture sold, expenses catching up to them without my pension padding the fall. I felt no triumph, only confirmation. In the summer, I saw one of my old dressers at a flea market. The seller said a young couple had dropped it off, desperate for cash. I didn't buy it back. Some things belong to the past for a reason. By autumn, a letter arrived. Not a text, not a call, a letter. Marina wrote of losing the house, of understanding too late what she'd done, of the children missing me, of learning what it feels like to be treated as disposable. I folded the letter and set aside. Healing doesn't run on deadlines. Weeks later, another letter came, this one filled with crayon drawings, Nina's careful handwriting, Leo's crooked stick figures. My heart ached, but it didn't waver. I replied once, kindly, clearly, boundaries intact. I don't know what the future holds with my daughter. Maybe something small and respectful can grow. Maybe not, but I know this much. The night I was denied a seat at the table was the night I finally stood up from it. And that choice changed everything. The first real winter storm after I left Marina's house arrived quietly, the way truth often does. No drama, no warning, just a steady accumulation that changes the landscape before anyone notices. Snow dusted the sidewalks outside Rose's apartment, softening the city's usual sharp edges. I stood by the window with a cup of tea, watching strangers hurry past, and realized something surprising. I wasn't waiting for my phone to ring anymore. For years, I'd lived in a constant state of anticipation, waiting for Marina to need something, for Lucas to complain about expenses, for the children's schedules to dictate my days. That invisible leash had finally been cut, and the absence of tension felt almost unnatural at first, like silence after a lifetime of noise. Rosa noticed the change before I did. "You're standing straighter," she said one morning as we folded laundry together. "You don't flinch when your phone vibrates." I think I forgot what peace felt like. I answered honestly. That peace, however, didn't come without echoes. Memories resurfaced at unexpected moments. While chopping vegetables, I remember Marina as a little girl, sitting at the kitchen table coloring while I sewed late into the night. While walking past the schoolyard, I recall waiting in the rain for her after piano lessons. Love doesn't evaporate just because respect disappears. It lingers, complicates, aches. In early February, I decided it was time to reclaim more than my finances. I went back to my old routines, ones I'd abandoned slowly without realizing it. I enrolled in a morning stretching class at the local senior center. On my first day, I stood awkwardly among strangers, feeling older than my 67 years. By the third session, I was laughing with a retired teacher named Clara and a former bus driver named Samuel, both of whom carried their own quiet stories of family disappointment. We didn't share details at first. We didn't need to. There was a shared understanding among us, a recognition that age didn't grant immunity from being taken for granted. One afternoon after class, Samuel said something that stuck with me. Children don't stop seeing their parents as tools unless something forces them to. I thought of Christmas Eve, the empty plate, Marina's voice, and I understood exactly what he meant. By March, my days had a gentle rhythm. Mornings with Rosa, afternoons at the center, evenings reading or watching old films. I began volunteering twice a week, teaching basic sewing and repairs at a community workshop. The young people who came in, college students, single parents, immigrants starting over, listened with genuine interest. They thanked me. They valued my experience. It felt radical. That same month, Marina tried again. This time, it wasn't a call or a letter. It was silence followed by strategy. Rosa started receiving hang-up calls. Unknown numbers. Breathing on the line. Once, a voice asked if an older woman named Elena lived there before disconnecting. We didn't need to guess who was behind it. Desperation makes people sloppy. I refused to react. Then, in April, I ran into Teresa, an old neighbor from my previous block. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. "Elena, I thought you moved away for good," she said. Something like that. I replied. Her expression shifted. "Your daughter, she's been asking about you. Says she's worried. Says you left without warning." I smiled faintly. That's one version of events. Teresa hesitated. "They're having trouble. Everyone can see it." I nodded. Trouble tends to become visible once the cushion disappears. A week later, Rosa came home with news. "I ran into someone from your old area," she said carefully. "They've listed the house." I felt the information settle without shock. I'd done the math months ago. Without my pension. Without the extras I'd covered quietly. Their lifestyle was unsustainable. What surprised me wasn't the sale. It was how little satisfaction I felt hearing about it. There was no thrill, no sense of victory, just confirmation. In May, while browsing a flea market on a Sunday morning, I saw something that stopped me cold. My dresser. I recognized it instantly. The carved corner worn smooth by decades of use. The small scratch Hector had made while moving it years ago. It sat between mismatched chairs and chipped mirrors, a handwritten sign taped to it. $150. Must go. I stood there longer than necessary. The seller noticed my stare. "Good piece," he said. "Solid. Don't make M like this anymore." "Where did it come from?" I asked, though I already knew. A couple with kids. Said they were downsizing. I thanked him and walked away. That was the moment I fully understood something important. Closure doesn't come from reclaiming what was taken. It comes from letting go without bitterness. Summer arrived, and with it, more distance. Marina stopped trying to contact me directly. Instead, she used the children as messengers through mutual acquaintances. Nina had started writing letters she never sent. Leo drew pictures of families with one figure standing slightly apart. I cried over those drawings alone, where no one could see. Strength doesn't mean the absence of pain. It means refusing to let pain dictate your choices. In July, Rosa received a call. That seal would have been unfolding quietly for months. The house had sold. New owners had moved in. That evening, we sat on the balcony with cups of coffee, the city glowing below us. "Do you regret it?" Rosa asked. I considered the question carefully. I regret that it had to happen this way. I don't regret standing up. In September, 9 months after Christmas Eve, a letter arrived in careful handwriting I recognized immediately. Marina's. I read it slowly, without rushing, without bracing for impact. She admitted things she'd never said aloud before. That she and Lucas had relied on me as a solution rather than a person. That losing the house had forced her to see herself clearly. That the way Lucas now spoke to her mirrored how they'd spoken to me. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask me to come back. She asked for forgiveness, but acknowledged she might not deserve it. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't a gift you give to ease someone else's discomfort. It's a process you choose when you're ready. 2 months later, another envelope arrived. Inside were drawings from Nina and Leo. Stick figures holding hands. A sun in the corner. My name written carefully, lovingly. That was when I decided to respond. Not with open arms. Not with rejection. With boundaries. I wrote back kindly but firmly. I told Marina I appreciated her honesty. I explained that trust takes time, consistency, and respect to rebuild. I agreed to meet occasionally, in neutral places, under clear conditions. I didn't promise more than I could give. As I sealed the envelope, I felt something close to pride, not in myself alone, but in the version of me I had finally allowed to exist. The woman who no longer begged for a seat at a table that had never truly welcomed her. The woman who chose dignity over silence. And the woman who understood at last that love without respect is not love at all. Autumn deepened into winter again, but it felt like a different season altogether. The cold no longer pressed on my chest the way it once had. I had learned how to keep warm without shrinking. Rose and I rearranged the apartment slightly. Nothing dramatic, just small changes that made the space feel shared rather than borrowed. A chair by the window became mine. A shelf in the kitchen held my spices and jars. It was subtle, but it mattered. I met Marina for the first time in nearly a year on a gray afternoon in late November. We chose a cafe halfway between our neighborhoods, neutral ground, as promised. I arrived early and sat with my back to the wall, a habit I hadn't realized I'd developed. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, older, as if the months had exacted a toll she hadn't anticipated. She hesitated when she saw me, then approached slowly. We exchanged a restrained hug, brief, careful, respectful. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm here," I replied. That's all either of us should expect today. We ordered coffee. The silence between us wasn't hostile. It was cautious. Finally, she spoke. "I've been meaning to say this without excuses," Marina began. "I'm sorry for humiliating you, for using you, for speaking about you the way I did. None of it was right." I studied her face, searching for deflection. There was none, just weariness and something like humility. "I hear you," I said, "but hearing is different from repairing." She nodded. "I know." She didn't cry. She didn't dramatize. She told me about the smaller apartment, the constant arguments with Lucas, the way financial stress had stripped away the illusion of control. She admitted that she'd mistaken dependence for entitlement and called it family. "I became someone I don't like," she said quietly. I took a sip of my coffee and chose my words carefully. "You became someone who forgot that parents age, but they don't stop being people." We talked for an hour. I didn't promise forgiveness. I didn't reopen wounds. When we parted, there was no embrace, just a mutual understanding that something fragile had begun, and it would need time. December arrived again, heavy with memory. I expected it to hurt more than it did. Instead, it felt reflective, almost instructional. I volunteered extra hours at the community workshop. I baked with Rosa. We decorated the apartment modestly, not for tradition's sake, but because it made us smile. On Christmas Eve, Rosa poured 2 glasses of wine and raised hers gently. "To chosen family," she said. "To dignity," I replied. I slept well that night. In January, Marina followed through on her promises, not with words, but with behavior. She sent occasional updates about the children, without pressure. She asked before calling. She never mentioned money. When Nina's birthday approached, she asked if I'd like to attend a small gathering at a park. I agreed on the condition that it remained brief and respectful. At the party, Nina ran into my arms with the unfiltered joy only children possess. Leo followed, quieter but smiling. Marina kept her distance, allowing space. Lucas wasn't there. Later, as the children played, Marina approached. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it wasn't easy." "Ease isn't the goal," I replied. "Integrity is." She nodded, accepting the boundary without protest. Spring brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Lucas moved out. Marina told me during a walk by the river, her voice steady but sad. "I finally saw the pattern," she said. "The way he spoke to you. The way he speaks to me now. I don't want my children thinking that's normal." I felt no satisfaction hearing this. Only a quiet sorrow that had taken loss for clarity to arrive. "Leaving doesn't make you weak," I told her. "Staying silent does." She looked at me with something like recognition, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. As months passed, our meetings remained limited and intentional. Sometimes with the children, sometimes just coffee. I never returned to her home. She never asked. In June, Nina asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, why didn't you tell Mom she was hurting you?" I knelt to her level. Because sometimes grown-ups don't listen until consequences speak louder than words. She considered this seriously, then nodded. I think I understand. That was when I knew I had done the right thing, not just for myself, but for them. I continued teaching at the community center, expanding my classes. Young people called me Maestra with affection. Rosa joked that I was busier in my late 60s than most people in their 40s. She wasn't wrong. Purpose as a way of filling space that pain once occupied. In August, Marina invited me to see her new apartment. I declined gently. Not yet, I said. Let's keep building where we are. She respected that. By September, a full year had passed since the night everything changed. I marked the anniversary quietly, with a long walk and a handwritten page in my journal. I didn't write about anger. I wrote about learning, about how self-respect is not loud, but is firm, how boundaries are not punishments, but protections, how love that demands self-erasure is not love at all. That evening, Rosa asked me something I hadn't expected. Do you ever wish you'd stayed and endured it longer? I didn't hesitate. No, staying would have taught them that cruelty has no cost. She smiled softly. You taught them otherwise. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't hardened or bitter. She was steadier, clearer, at peace. I had not been rescued. I had rescued myself. And that, I finally understood, was the most important lesson of all. The second autumn after I left Marina's house arrived with a gentler light than the first. Leaves turned slowly, as if the city itself had learned patience. I noticed things I used to miss. The way the air smelled just before dusk, the soft scrape of wind against balcony railings, the comfort routines that belonged to me and no one else. By then, my life had settled into something solid. Not flashy, not dramatic. Solid. Mornings began early, not because anyone demanded it, but because I liked watching the city wake. I helped Rosa with breakfast, then walked to the senior center where my sewing and repair classes had grown unexpectedly popular. People signed up weeks in advance. Some came for practical reasons, hemming pants, fixing torn jackets, but many stayed for conversation. They talked while their hands worked, and in those conversations, I recognized fragments of my own past. One woman, lured, confessed quietly one morning, "My son says I'm lucky he lets me stay with him." She said it with a small laugh, but her eyes told the truth. I put my hand over hers and said gently, "Luck has nothing to do with respect." Those words seemed to follow me that day, echoing in places I hadn't expected. Marina, to her credit, continued to keep her distance unless invited. When she did reach out, it was measured, no urgency, no guilt-laced language. She asked how I was, not what I needed. It was a subtle shift, but a real one. In October, she asked if she could bring Nina and Leo to see me at the community center's small fall fair. "Only if you're comfortable," she added quickly, as if reminding herself of the rules. "I am," I replied, "as long as it's simple." It was more than simple. It was healing. The children ran between booths, faces painted, hands sticky with sweets. Nina proudly showed me a scarf she'd made in a school craft class. Leo clung to my hand when the music got loud. Marina hovered nearby, watchful but restrained, letting moments belong to us without inserting herself. At one point, Nina asked, "Grandma, do you like living with Rosa?" "Yes," I said honestly. "Very much." "Is it because she's nicer to you?" Leo asked, blunt in the way only children can be. Marina stiffened, ready to intervene, but I answered calmly, "It's because we take care of each other. That's what makes a home." Leo nodded, satisfied. That night, Marina texted me a simple message. "Thank you for today. I see now what I didn't before." I didn't reply immediately. Insight needs time to prove itself. As winter approached, something unexpected happened. Lucas called me. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. When I finally did, his voice sounded unfamiliar, strained, stripped of its usual arrogance. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said quickly, as if afraid I'd hang up. "I just needed to say something." I listened without interrupting. "I was wrong," he admitted. About everything. About you. About what I thought you owed us. Losing the house. The marriage. It forced me to see how much I took for granted. I said nothing. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. I just didn't want to carry this without saying it out loud. After a pause, I replied, acknowledgement is a beginning. What you do next determines whether it means anything. He accepted that without argument. We hung up. I didn't feel relief or anger, just closure in its simplest form. December returned again, and with it, the anniversary of that night. I didn't dread it. Instead, I treated it as a marker, a reminder of distance traveled. Rosa suggested we spend the evening quietly at home. We cooked together, laughed at an old movie, and toasted not to survival, but to choice. I'm glad you stayed, she said at one point, meaning more than just the apartment. So am I answered. In January, I faced a decision I hadn't anticipated. The community center offered me a small stipend to formally lead weekly classes. It wasn't much, but it was symbolic, payment without obligation, appreciation without strings. I accepted. Marina heard about it through Nina and congratulated me. I'm proud of you, she said, and for the first time, it didn't feel like performance. Spring brought another test. Marina asked if I would consider attending a family counseling session, with her and the children only. No Lucas, no ambush, just an invitation. I thought about it for days, not because I was afraid, but because I understood the weight of saying yes. Finally, I agreed, with conditions clearly stated. The session was difficult, honest, painful at times. Marina took responsibility without deflecting. The therapist helped Nina and Leo express feelings they didn't have words for before. Confusion, sadness, relief. I spoke my truth calmly, without accusation. I described what it feels like to be erased slowly, one small dismissal at a time. Marina cried. The children listened. Afterward, we sat in silence for a while. Then Marina said something that told me more than any apology ever could. I don't want my children to learn that love means tolerating harm. Neither did I. As the months passed, our relationship settled into something cautious but real. I saw the children regularly, always on neutral ground. Marina never asked for more than I offered. When she struggled, she didn't turn to me as a solution. She turned to her own resources. That difference mattered. In July, Rosa's health wavered briefly. Nothing serious, but enough to remind us both of our age. I was there for her without hesitation, the way she had been for me. Sitting in the clinic waiting room, I realized how profoundly different this bond was from the one I'd left behind. No debt, no leverage, just presence. That night, Rosa squeezed my hand and said, "Whatever happens, you won't be alone." I believed her. Toward the end of summer, Marina asked a question that might have terrified me once. "Mom," she said quietly during a walk, "do you think someday you could forgive me fully?" I stopped and looked at her, not as my daughter the child, not as my daughter the authority figure, but as a flawed adult standing where I once stood. "Forgiveness isn't a switch," I said. "It's a process that depends on consistency, on time, on continued respect." She nodded, accepting the answer as it was, not pushing for comfort. That acceptance told me more than the question itself. By early autumn, I realized something else had changed. I no longer rehearsed conversations in my head. I no longer braced for disappointment. My life had room in it now. Room for growth, for error, for joy without fear of cost. One evening, as I closed the community center after class, a young woman approached me. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "You make this place feel safe." I walked home under a sky streaked with fading light, her words warming me more than the scarf around my neck. That night, I wrote in my journal, as I often did now. I wrote about how standing up doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like leaving quietly. Sometimes it looks like staying gone. And sometimes, if circumstances truly change, it looks like allowing limited return. On your own terms. I closed the journal and turned off the lamp, content. The woman I had been, the one who stood with an empty plate at a table that no longer saw her, felt distant now, not erased, integrated, honor for what she endured, respected for what she chose. And as sleep came easily, I knew with certainty that whatever the remaining chapters held, they would be written by me. By the time the third winter since my departure began to announce itself, I no longer thought of my life as something that had been broken and repaired. It felt more accurate to say it had been reassembled, piece by piece, deliberately, without forcing anything back into places where it no longer fit. That distinction mattered. Repairs imply returning to an original shape. Reassembly allows for something new. Rosa and I had fallen into a partnership that required no explanation. We divided tasks naturally. Some days I cooked. Some days she did. When one of us was tired, the other picked up the slack without comment or scorekeeping. That quiet fairness had become the foundation of our home. There were no ledgers, no unspoken debts, no expectations that love should be proven through sacrifice. One chilly morning in November, Rosa surprised me by handing me a folded brochure over breakfast. "You should think about this," she said casually. It was for a short-term cultural exchange program run by the community center. 3 weeks in spring. Traveling to smaller towns to teach practical skills to women who were restarting their lives after difficult circumstances. Sewing, budgeting, basic repairs. The work I already did, but on a wider scale. "I'm not exactly young," I said, half joking. She smiled. "Neither are the people who would benefit most from what you know." I didn't answer right away. The idea stirred something in me. Excitement mixed with hesitation. Travel still felt like a luxury I hadn't fully earned back after years of walking on eggshells. That afternoon, I took a long walk alone, letting the thoughts settle. By the time I returned home, my decision had formed quietly without fanfare. "I'll apply," I told her. The process moved faster than I expected. By January, I had been accepted. The program would take me through 3 different towns, staying a week in each, living in shared accommodations, working with women from a wide range of backgrounds. Some had escaped controlling families. Others were rebuilding after divorce, illness, or financial collapse. When Marina heard about it, she reacted with something close to awe. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "Traveling on your own?" "Yes," I replied. "It's something I want to do." "I wish I'd had that courage at your age," she said. I didn't correct her. Courage isn't owned by any particular decade. The weeks before my departure were filled with preparation, lists, packing, paperwork. It felt good to plan something that existed entirely outside my role as mother or grandmother. This was mine. In March, I boarded a train with a single suitcase, lighter than the one I'd carried away from Marina's house years earlier, but heavier with intention. Rosa hugged me tightly at the station. "Go remind the world who you are," she said. The first town was small, quiet, and welcoming in the way places often are when they don't pretend to be anything else. The women I met there came from different stories, but their eyes held the same cautious curiosity I'd once seen in my own reflection. I didn't lecture. I demonstrated. I listened. I shared only what was necessary. One woman, Adela, stayed after class one evening while the others filtered out. "My daughter says I'm lucky she lets me stay with her," she said, her voice low. "She says I should be grateful." I met her gaze gently. Gratitude should never be demanded. It should be earned on both sides. She nodded slowly, as if filing the thought away for later use. In the second town, a younger participant approached me with tears in her eyes after a session on household budgeting. "I thought being dependent was the same as being loved," she admitted. "So did I once," I replied. Each week, I found pieces of my own story reflected back at me, not painfully, but affirmingly. My experience wasn't just survival, it was knowledge. And knowledge, when shared, multiplies. When I returned home in April, Rosa greeted me with the enthusiasm of someone welcoming a traveler back from a long voyage. "You look different," she observed. "I feel different," I replied. That difference showed itself in small ways. I walked more confidently. I spoke more directly. I no longer softened truths out of habit. Marina noticed it too. "You don't apologize before speaking anymore," she said one afternoon, half amused, half thoughtful. "I don't need to," I replied. What I say stands on its own. Spring turned into summer, and with it came a quiet but significant shift. Marina began making decisions without seeking validation from me or anyone else. She took a new position at work, one that paid less initially but offered stability. She enrolled in evening classes to finish a certification she'd abandoned years earlier. "I want my children to see me build something honestly," she said. I respected that she told me without asking for praise. In June, Nina brought home a school assignment that made my throat tighten. She'd written an essay titled Someone I Admire. It wasn't about a celebrity. It wasn't even about her mother. It was about me. She writes that you taught her it's okay to leave places where people don't listen, Marina said quietly as she handed me the paper. I read it alone later, letting the words settle without tears. Children understand more than we think. That summer, Lucas faded almost entirely from the edges of our lives. He moved to another city for work. The divorce finalized quietly, without drama. Marina told me once, simply, "I don't miss the version of myself I became with him." Then it was the right decision, I said. August brought another turning point, one I hadn't planned for. The community center offered me a permanent coordinator role. Modest pay, flexible hours, a say in programming and outreach. It was recognition, not obligation. I accepted without hesitation. The work energized me. I organized workshops, invited speakers, connected women who would never have crossed paths otherwise. The center became a hub of shared resilience, and I felt deeply rooted there. One afternoon, after a particularly successful event, Rosa leaned over and whispered, "You know, you've built a whole life here." I smiled. I didn't build it alone. As autumn approached again, I reflected on how differently time felt now. Days were full, but not frantic. Relationships were intentional, not reactive. I no longer feared being alone, because I knew solitude wasn't the same as abandonment. In October, Marina invited me to dinner. Not at her home, but at a small restaurant the children loved. It was simple, relaxed, no tension. At one point, Nina asked, "Grandma, why do you always look so calm now?" I considered the question seriously before answering, because I learned that my peace is my responsibility. She nodded, absorbing it as truth. Later that night, Marina walked with me part of the way home. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make up for what I did," she said. "You don't have to," I replied. "You just have to keep doing better." She smiled, relieved. As winter approached once more, I realized something profound. The story I once thought was about being mistreated had become a story about self-definition, about refusing to disappear quietly, about choosing environments where respect wasn't conditional. I had not won anything over my family. I had won myself back. And that, I knew with certainty, was a victory no one could ever take from me. The fourth winter since I left Marina's house did not arrive with drama or dread. It came the way all seasons eventually do, quietly, inevitably, without asking permission. And for the first time in my adult life, I welcomed it without bracing myself for impact. By then, my days no longer revolved around recovery. They revolved around living. Rosa and I had turned our small apartment into something that felt permanent without being confining. We didn't speak about it often, but we both knew we had chosen each other in a way that went beyond convenience. We had become witnesses to one another's ordinary days, and that kind of companionship carries its own quiet weight. I had taken the coordinator role at the community center seriously, perhaps more seriously than anyone expected. I wasn't interested in titles, but I was deeply interested in creating spaces where people, especially older women, were not treated as leftovers from someone else's life. I organized workshops on financial literacy, tenant rights, and personal boundaries. Attendance grew steadily. Word spread. One afternoon, after a session on reclaiming independence later in life, a woman approached me hesitantly. She was probably in her early 70s, impeccably dressed, hands folded nervously in front of her. "I just want to say thank you," she said. I thought it was too late for me to change anything. I met her eyes. "It's only too late if you're no longer here." She smiled, something loosening in her expression, and walked away straighter than she had arrived. Those moments, small, uncelebrated, were the ones that anchor me now. Marina continued to change in ways that felt genuine rather than performative. She had stopped narrating her growth to me, stopped seeking approval. Instead, she lived it. She managed her finances carefully. She didn't complain when money was tight. She learned how to say no to others, and sometimes to her children, without guilt. That was perhaps the most difficult adjustment for her. One evening, she called me frustrated. Nina wanted to join another activity, and I had to tell her we can't afford it right now, she said. I felt like a failure. You felt like a parent, I replied. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. I wish I'd understood that sooner. So, do most of us, I said gently. The children were growing fast, their personalities sharpening, their questions becoming more pointed. Leo was no longer timid. He challenged explanations that didn't make sense. Nina observed everything, storing information carefully before forming opinions. I noticed how both of them watched adults closely, not with suspicion, but with discernment. One day, while we were baking together at Rose's apartment, Nina asked a question that caught me off guard. Grandma, why didn't you just yell at Mom when she was mean to you? I wiped my hands on a towel and sat down beside her, because yelling only works when the other person is willing to hear you. Sometimes, the only way to be heard is to leave. She thought about that, then nodded slowly, like when I walk away from kids at school who don't listen. Exactly like that, I said. She smiled, satisfied. That winter, I was invited to speak at a regional conference on aging and community resilience. I almost declined out of habit, then stopped myself. Old reflexes die hard. I accepted. Standing at the podium, looking out at a room filled with strangers, I felt no fear. I spoke plainly about what happens when older adults, especially women, are treated as resources rather than people. I spoke about the danger of gratitude being weaponized. I spoke about dignity, not as an abstract concept, but as a daily practice. Afterward, several attendees approached me with stories eerily similar to my own. Parents who had been slowly edged out, pensions absorbed into household budgets, love turned conditional. You gave me language for something I couldn't explain, one woman said. I carried that sentence with me for weeks. Spring arrived again, and with it, another shift, this one unexpected. Rosa sat me down one morning, unusually serious. I need to tell you something, she said. Not because anything is wrong, but because honesty matters. She explained that her niece had offered her a place closer to the coast, a quieter town, better air. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't urgent, just an option. I'm not asking you to come, she said quickly. And I'm not asking you to leave. I just wanted you to know. I listened without panic, without fear. That, too, surprised me. Thank you for telling me. I said, whatever you choose, we'll handle it. We didn't decide anything that day, or the next, or the next. The fact that we could sit with uncertainty without it becoming a threat felt like a triumph in itself. Marina found out weeks later and reacted anxiously. Does that mean you'll move again? She asked. I don't know, I replied honestly. And that's okay. She frowned. I don't like not knowing. Neither did I said softly. But learning to live with it changed me. By early summer, Rosa decided not to move, at least not yet. She liked her routines. She liked the life we had built. We both understood that choices could change again in the future, and that understanding brought comfort rather than fear. That summer, something subtle but important happened. I stopped being careful. Not reckless, not unkind, just unguarded. I laughed more freely. I spoke without rehearsing. I allowed myself to enjoy moments without scanning for consequences. I trusted that if discomfort rose, I had the tools to address it. Marina noticed. You seem lighter, she said during a walk. Like you're not waiting for something bad to happen. I stopped expecting punishment for existing. I replied. She absorbed that quietly. In August, the community center hosted an intergenerational event. Teenagers taught older adults basic technology skills. Older adults taught cooking, sewing, budgeting. The room buzzed with energy. At one table, Nina patiently showed a woman how to send a text message. "See," Nina said proudly, "it's not scary." I watched from a distance. Heartful. Later that night, Marina said, "I think you change more than just our family." I didn't respond immediately. Change is not something you claim. It's something others recognize. As autumn approached again, marking nearly 4 years since the night I walked away, I found myself reflecting not on what I'd lost, but on what I'd refused to lose. My voice, my agency, my sense of worth. Those things have been tested quietly, eroded slowly, almost invisibly. Reclaiming them had not required confrontation or spectacle. It had required resolve. One evening, Rosa and I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker on. "Do you ever think about how close you came to staying?" she asked. I nodded. "All the time. And I'm grateful I didn't." She smiled. "So am I." That night, as I prepared for bed, I realized that my story was no longer about survival or endurance. It was about authorship, about choosing how my days unfolded, about understanding that respect, once withdrawn, must be re-earned, not demanded from a person who was harmed. I slept peacefully, without dreams of empty plates or cold words. And when morning came, I greeted it without hesitation, knowing that whatever chapters remained would be written with the same clarity that had carried me this far. By the time the 5th year since that Christmas Eve began to unfold, my life no longer felt like a response to something that had happened to me. It felt authored, intentionally paced, deliberately chosen, shaped by values rather than reactions. That distinction mattered more than I could have explained back when everything still hurt. Rosa and I had settled into a rhythm that didn't need maintenance meetings or emotional check-ins. We noticed each other's moods without interrogation. We gave space without withdrawal. If one of us woke early, the kettle was already on. If one of us came home late, the light in the kitchen stayed on. It was companionship without performance. The community center had become my second home, though in truth, it felt like a first. We expanded programming again. Legal clinics for seniors navigating housing, small group sessions for caregivers learning to set boundaries, financial workshops that demystified pensions and benefits. Attendance doubled. Grants followed. Responsibility grew. I welcomed it. One morning, while reviewing schedules, I caught myself smiling at a simple realization. I was trusted, not tolerated, not accommodated. Trusted. That same week, a woman named Helena arrived for her first session. She sat stiffly at the back, arms crossed, eyes guarded. After class, she approached me hesitantly. "My daughter says I'm difficult," she said, as if confessing a crime. She says, "I don't know when to stop asking." I asked gently, "What do you ask for?" "Respect," she answered without hesitation. I nodded. "Then you're not difficult. You're clear." She exhaled like someone who'd been holding her breath for years. Moments like that reminded me why I did this work. Not because I enjoyed retelling my story, but because fragments of it lived everywhere, quietly, in women who had learned to doubt themselves for surviving too long. Marina continued to stabilize. Her progress wasn't linear, but it was honest. She struggled at times. Single parenting isn't romantic. But she didn't outsource responsibility anymore. When she felt overwhelmed, she asked for help without expecting rescue. That difference changed everything. One afternoon, she called me after a difficult day. "I didn't yell," she said first, as if announcing an achievement. "I wanted to, but I didn't." I smiled into the phone. "That's growth." "I walked away," she continued. "I remember what you said, about leaving when you're not being heard." I felt something settle quietly inside me. Not pride, relief. That summer, Nina entered adolescence with the seriousness of someone who had been watching adults closely her entire life. She asked sharper questions now. About money. About fairness. About why people stay where they're unhappy. One evening, while helping me organize supplies at the center, she asked, "Grandma, do you think people change because they want to or because they have to?" I thought about it carefully. Usually because they have to. Wanting comes later, if it comes at all. She considered that, then nodded. "That makes sense." Leo, meanwhile, had grown into a quietly observant boy. He said less, but when he spoke, his words landed with unexpected precision. Once, after overhearing a conversation about boundaries, he said simply, "People should knock before they take." Out of the mouths of children, truth often arrives unadorned. That autumn, Rosa faced a decision of her own. Her health remained good, but she wanted to simplify. Fewer commitments, more rest. She proposed something that startled me. "I'm thinking of putting the apartment in my name only," she said, watching my face carefully. "Not because I don't trust you. Because I don't want you to feel obligated." I laughed softly. "Rosa, I've never felt obligated." "I know," she said. "I just want you to know you stay, because you choose to, not because of paperwork." We updated nothing. We changed nothing. But the conversation itself was a gift. That winter, I experienced something I hadn't anticipated. Fatigue. Not physical exhaustion, but the tiredness that comes from carrying responsibility well. I didn't fight it. I delegated more. I stepped back from some programs. I trusted the team I'd built. Trusting others to continue your work is a quiet kind of courage. In January, Marina asked if I would join her and the children for a short trip. A weekend near the coast. Neutral territory. Separate rooms. Clear boundaries. I hesitated, not out of fear, but caution. Then I agreed. The trip was uneventful in the best possible way. We walked. We ate simple meals. The children laughed freely. Marina respected every boundary without comment. Lucas remained absent, as he should. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Marina said something unexpected. "I used to think you were strong because you endured," she said. "Now I see you're strong because you left." I didn't respond right away. Some realizations don't need affirmation. When we returned, life resumed its steady pace. The trip didn't change anything, and that, too, felt right. Healing doesn't need to be dramatic to be real. Spring returned again, bringing with it a new generation of participants at the center. Younger women now, 30s, 40s, balancing caregiving with careers, often invisible in both spaces. They asked hard questions about loyalty, obligation, and self-erasure. I answered honestly. Love isn't proven by suffering. I told them, if it were, the most wounded people would be the most cherished. That line circulated quietly through the center. I heard it repeated back to me weeks later by someone else. Language once released travels. That May, something happened that might once have undone me. Marina called, upset. Lucas had requested to attend one of Nina's school events. Nina didn't want him there. Marina felt torn between fairness and protection. "What would you do?" she asked. I chose my words carefully. I would listen to the child who has to sit with the feeling afterward. She did exactly that. When she told me later that she'd honored Nina's request, her voice was steady. It wasn't easy, she admitted, but it was right. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not because she followed my advice, but because she trusted her own judgment. That summer, I turned 70. The center organized a small celebration I hadn't asked for. A cake, a card signed by dozens of names. Stories shared aloud. How someone had opened a bank account for the first time. How another had left an unsafe home. How one woman had finally told her son no without apology. I listened, overwhelmed but grounded. Rosa squeezed my hand. "You've lived several lives," she whispered. "I'm living the one that fits," I replied. As the year progressed, I noticed something else changing. I no longer flinched at the word mother. It no longer carried only disappointment or grief. It had expanded into mentorship. Example, presence without possession. In September, Nina wrote another essay. This one was titled, "What I Want to Be When I Grow Up." She wrote about being someone who listens. Someone who leaves when staying costs too much. Someone who builds homes where people feel safe. Marina showed it to me without commentary. I returned it quietly. "She's paying attention," I said. "Yes," Marina replied. "She is." By autumn, I realized I was no longer waiting for the story to end. I wasn't measuring progress against pain anymore. I had stepped fully into the present. One evening, after a long day, Rosa asked me something simple. Are you happy? I considered it, not out of habit, but respect for the question. Yes, I said, and not because everything is perfect, because everything is honest. She smiled, content. As the year drew to a close, I found myself thinking back, not to the night at the table, not to the empty plate, but to the woman who stood there holding it. I felt tenderness for her now, gratitude. She had endured long enough to recognize the moment when endurance became self-betrayal. She had walked away. And in doing so, she had walked toward a life that no longer asked her to disappear quietly for the comfort of others. Whatever chapters remained, and I knew there were still many, I would meet them as I had learned to meet everything else. With clarity, with boundaries, and with the unshakable knowledge that my worth was never negotiable. The 6th winter since the night everything changed arrived without ceremony. No sharp memories. No echoes of shame. Just cold air, early sunsets, and the steady rhythm of a life that finally belonged to me. I had stopped counting time from the moment I left Marina's house. Somewhere along the way, the calendar lost its power to define me. Years no longer felt like proof of survival. They felt like chapters completed with intention. I woke each morning knowing where I stood. Not in anyone's debt, not bracing for judgment, not shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. Rosa and I still share the apartment, but by then it felt less like a living arrangement and more like a partnership rooted in respect. We had separate routines and shared ones. Quiet mornings and lively evenings, mutual care without obligation. If one of us needed space, it was given freely. If one of us needed help, it was offered without hesitation. There was no scorekeeping because there was nothing to prove. At the community center, I gradually shifted from leading to mentoring. New coordinators took on responsibilities I once carried alone. I watched them grow with the same quiet pride I used to feel watching Marina learn to ride a bicycle. Back when encouragement didn't come with strings attached. Letting go of control, I had learned, was not the same as losing purpose. One afternoon, as I packed up my things after workshop, a young volunteer asked me, "How did you know when it was time to stop enduring and start choosing?" I thought about that for a long moment before answering. When staying required me to stop recognizing myself. She nodded, as if the answer confirmed something she already knew but hadn't yet named. Marina, and I had found a rhythm too, one that worked precisely because it wasn't forced. We spoke regularly, but not constantly. We met occasionally, but not by default. When we did talk, it was honest, sometimes warm, sometimes uncomfortable, always respectful. She had grown into her life slowly, deliberately. Work remained demanding. Single parenting tested her patience and resilience. But she no longer expected rescue. When she struggled, she named it. When she succeeded, she owned it. She had learned, finally, that independence wasn't abandonment and accountability wasn't punishment. One evening, she came to me with something that made my chest tighten. Nina's school counselor asked us to talk about family history, she said. She wants to understand where she comes from. And I asked, and I don't want to lie, Marina replied, but I don't want to burden her either. I considered this carefully. Tell her the truth without cruelty. Tell her people make mistakes. Tell her people can learn. And tell her that leaving harm is not the same as leaving love. Marina nodded. I wish someone had told me that sooner. So do I said softly. The children, now older, understood more than they ever let on. Nina had grown into a thoughtful, perceptive young person with strong opinions and a clear sense of fairness. Leo, quieter but no less observant, watched how adults behaved and drew his own conclusions. They asked fewer questions now, but the ones they did ask cut straight to the heart. One afternoon, while we were walking together, Leo asked me, "Grandma, why do some people get mad when you say no?" I smiled gently. Because they were counting on your yes. He thought about that, then nodded as if a puzzle piece had clicked into place. By then, Lucas existed only on the periphery of our lives. There were no confrontations, no lingering resentment. Distance had done what arguments never could. It had clarified the truth. Marina no longer tried to explain him away. She didn't defend him. She simply acknowledged what was and moved forward. I noticed something else, too. I no longer felt the need to justify my past choices to anyone. Not to Marina, not to friends, not even to myself. The story had settled into something solid and complete. I had walked away from mistreatment. I had rebuilt. I had set boundaries and lived within them. That was enough. On my 71st birthday, I woke early and sat by the window with my tea, watching the city come alive. I didn't feel old. I felt present. There is a difference. Rosa joined me quietly. Any regrets? She asked, half joking, half sincere. I shook my head, only that I waited as long as I did. She smiled. But you didn't wait forever. No, I said, I didn't. Later that day, I received a letter. Not an email, not a message, but a letter written in careful handwriting. It was from Nina. She wrote about school, about friends, about a book she was reading. Then, near the end, she wrote something that stayed with me. Mom says you taught her that love isn't about control. I think you taught me that too. I folded the letter slowly, feeling a quiet completeness settle over me. Not triumph, not vindication. Completion. That evening, as I prepared dinner with Rosa, I realized how far I had come, not just from that night at the table, but from the woman I had been before it. The woman who believed patience could fix disrespect. The woman who mistook endurance for virtue. The woman who thought leaving would mean losing everything. I had lost something, yes, but it was something I should never have been asked to give in the first place. I had gained far more. I had gained peace that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I had gained relationships rooted in choice rather than obligation. I had gained the ability to say no without apology and yes without fear. Most of all, I had gained myself. As I write these final lines, seated at the small desk Rosa set up for me by the window, I know this story doesn't end with reconciliation or dramatic justice. It ends with something quieter and far more powerful. It ends with dignity. If you're reading this and recognizing pieces of your own life, if you've been taught that love requires silence, that family excuses harm, that your worth is measured by what you provide, remember this. It is never too late to choose yourself. Boundaries are not betrayal. Walking away from mistreatment is not abandonment. Respect is not something you earn by suffering. It is something you claim by refusing to disappear. And before you go, do me one last favor. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and share in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice helps these stories reach others who may be standing right now at a table where they're no longer being seen and need the courage to stand up and walk away.